And I think the most compelling thing I've heard is a conclusion that he jeopardized the lives of pilots that were going into action by releasing critical data. All of this adds up to very, very poor judgment.
Senator Jack Reed just said the quiet part out loud. Pete Hegseth didn't just show bad judgment. He jeopardized U.S. troops. He mishandled sensitive military intel. And now there's evidence suggesting he may be covering up decisions that edge into war crime territory. And the White House? They're pretending nothing happened. Here's what that really exposes. When someone in power endangers the people they're supposed to protect, and the administration's response is to look the other way, that's not loyalty. That's complicity. This isn't about politics. It's about whether we still believe that people in charge of life and death decisions should be held to the highest standard, or no standard at all. Because if accountability doesn't apply at the top, it doesn't exist anywhere. If you believe democracy survives on accountability, not spin, hit that subscribe button. We need to be the loudest voice for truth online, and that starts right here. Let's build this community together.
To the Senate, Rhode Island Democratic Senator Jack Reed, who is the ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Senator, I'm so glad to have you with us. What do you know?
Thank you very much.
About the report, the Inspector General's report, and what is your assessment of the conduct of the Defense Secretary?
Well, the report, which I've read, is still classified, but there are public statements already that have indicated that there were serious misjudgments by the Secretary. Poor decisions about taking sensitive information and putting it on an unclassified system. And I think the most compelling thing I've heard is a conclusion that he jeopardized the lives of pilots that were going into action by releasing critical data. All of this adds up to very, very poor judgment. He's, as I said at his confirmation hearing, I did not believe he had the competence, the temperament, and the experience to be Secretary of Defense, and he's proven that.
The White House said the following through Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary. This review affirms what the administration has said from the beginning. No classified information was leaked. President Trump stands by Secretary Hegseth. Your reaction to that, Senator Reed?
Well, that might be a technicality. Certainly very highly sensitive information was released on a non-classified source. None of that information should have been discussed on that source. And the Inspector General concluded that the release of the information jeopardized the lives, potentially, of American airmen and other servicemen. So that's a very weak defense for what took place.
And, Senator, when the White House says, as the Pentagon also says, well, nobody got hurt, nobody was really truly jeopardized or put in any jeopardies, so what are you worrying about?
Well, I would worry about that becoming a common practice in the Department of Defense. One of the ironies here is if someone else besides Secretary Hegseth did it, they would likely be charged under the UCMJ or other federal law for releasing classified information or at least utilizing a unclassified system to talk about sensitive information. So we're worried about the impact on the military. If this gets to be accepted, it'll be extraordinarily dangerous to the conduct of military operations.
Tomorrow, Senator, Admiral Frank Mitch Bradley will come before you and others on the Armed Services Committee in regard to what happened on September 2nd off the coast of Venezuela. 2 strikes, maybe more, and suggestions that that second strike might have been a war crime or something approximating one. What do you want to hear from Admiral Bradley? And have you reached, I know you choose your words carefully, Senator, any conclusions about whether or not what has been reported might constitute a war crime?
Well, first of all, we have to give Admiral Bradley an opportunity to explain the situation. And I would also commend Senator Wicker because he joined me in calling for a thorough investigation. We're going to essentially ask in detail what happened, who gave what orders, what were the orders? Were they to disrupt the traffic? Were they to simply sink the ships, or other aspects of this? What has been suggested in the press, if that is true, that there were deliberate attacks upon individuals in the water, that would certainly constitute a war crime.
I want to read for you something, Senator, that Tom Nichols wrote in The Atlantic this week, because the Pentagon said Admiral Bradley had broad discretion and that Secretary Hegseth did not give him an explicit order for a second or maybe more strikes against those clinging to wreckage from the first strike. He writes as follows: "This seems implausible. Bradley is an experienced officer who, by virtue of his rank and position, would be intimately familiar with the laws of armed conflict. He would have to know that such an order is likely a war crime, and any senior officer would want civilian leadership to sign off." Do you believe that to be accurate?
I think that's an accurate assessment, yes. I also understand and recall that Secretary Hegseth was very prominently declaring that he had essentially been involved with the details of all these initial strikes, that it was his work, his involvement that was significant. And now he seems to be walking away and saying, well, no, this was I was too busy to watch the rest of the video. I walked away and Admiral Bradley did something. It's not a particularly compelling response when you contrast it with his boasting, really, of how intimately he was involved in the initial operations, the first several strikes.
Senator Reid, I want to play for you sound from President Trump just this afternoon about what he, in response to a question about potential land strikes in Venezuela, said. Please listen.
Very soon we're going to start doing it on land, too, because we know every route, we know every house, we know where they manufacture this crap, we know where they put it all together, and I think you're going to see it very soon on land.
What are the implications of that, and do you believe this is a full-bore intimidation campaign by the president to drive Nicolas Maduro, the leader of Venezuela, into exile without actually launching kinetic strikes in the country?
Well, I think it's a very complicated, confused strategy. First of all, there's no rationale for keeping a aircraft carrier task force in the Caribbean. They could be used more effectively elsewhere. It's a head game he's playing with Maduro. Just a few days ago, it was reported he spoke to him. Now today, he's claiming he's going to have land attacks. I don't think there's a strategy behind this. I think a lot of it is just off the cuff, ad hoc. I want to get rid of him today, tomorrow maybe I can make a deal. And this is characterizing a great deal of the national security strategy, and that's probably not the right term, but the national security programs of this administration. One day he's going to negotiate, the next day he's going to attack. I don't think there's any legal basis for the United States to conduct military operations against the government of Venezuela in Venezuela. There's a separate issue here about the drug dealers. That, too, is highly questionable. But an attack on a sovereign nation without any more serious justification would require, I think, the act of Congress.
Rhode Island Democratic Senator Jack Reed, ranking Democrat on the Armed Services Committee. Always a pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
When Senator Jack Reed speaks on matters of national security, people in Washington listen, because he doesn't deal in drama. He deals in facts. And what he just said about Pete Hegseth's conduct should shake the entire country awake. Reed has now reviewed the Pentagon's classified Inspector General findings on Hegseth's Signalgate scandal. And his reaction wasn't political. It was visceral. He described the secretary's decisions as very, very poor judgment. But that phrase doesn't capture the weight of what's really at stake here. This wasn't a slip-up. According to Reid, Hegseth took sensitive military information, data tied to live operations, and moved it onto an unsecured personal device. That alone would get any junior officer disciplined, possibly court-martialed. But when a sitting Secretary of Defense does it, Pete Reid makes it clear he may have jeopardized the lives of U.S. pilots. Think about what that means. These are Americans flying into hostile environments, trusting that their leadership is protecting their safety with every possible safeguard. And instead, their own Secretary of Defense may have exposed them. Reid says this breach was so serious that if anyone other than Hegseth had done it, they would likely face consequences under military law. That is not normal. That is not routine. That is not something you brush aside by saying, "No one was hurt." And yet, that's exactly what the White House is doing. They're defending the secretary on a technicality, insisting the leaked material wasn't classified. But Reid immediately cuts through that excuse. Classification status doesn't magically erase danger. Sensitive operational data doesn't stop being sensitive just because someone failed to stamp the right label on it. Reid's point is unmistakable. The content put American service members at risk, and the defense being offered is insulting to anyone who understands how national security actually works. But it doesn't stop with Signalgate. Reid is preparing for testimony from Admiral Bradley regarding the now infamous September 2nd boat strike, a strike that may have included a second hit on shipwreck survivors. Reid carefully avoids prejudging the facts, but he doesn't deny what everyone else is already seeing clearly. If survivors clinging to wreckage were deliberately targeted, that is not a gray area. Beat. That is a potential war crime under the laws of armed conflict. And here's the part that should concern every viewer. Reid openly questions whether Hegseth is now trying to shift responsibility onto others, after previously bragging about overseeing the strikes himself. That kind of whiplash, from boasting to denial, is exactly why Congressional oversight exists. Because accountability doesn't just disappear when it becomes inconvenient. And then President Trump adds another layer of recklessness, making off-the-cuff threats about launching land strikes in Venezuela. Reid's response is blunt. There is no legal basis, no coherent strategy, and no justification for escalating into a direct attack on a sovereign nation. Reid has been in Washington too long to be shocked. But even he sounds alarmed by the inconsistency and impulsiveness surrounding these operations. This is not a policy disagreement, it's a crisis of competence. Reid's message isn't subtle. This secretary is not fit for the responsibilities he holds, and his actions could endanger both American service members and America's reputation on the world stage. And that's why we need transparency. Because right now, the only thing more dangerous than the decisions being made is the secrecy being used to shield them. If you're watching this, don't sit out. Oversight only happens when the public refuses to look away. So stay engaged, stay informed, and help push this conversation into the light. If you want more coverage from a perspective that won't sugarcoat the stakes, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We have much more to break down.